What if I told you winning an international case competition had almost nothing to do with the slides, not the template, not the framework, not even the analysis? It has everything to do with trust. Today, I'm sitting down with championship coach Mats Urde from Lund University, a winning coach at John Molson's MBA International Case Competition, who believes leadership is more like sailing in the storm than solving a spreadsheet. What he does before his teams ever solve a case might surprise you. If you're a student, a coach, or an educator who wants to build high performance teams, especially in the age of AI, this conversation will completely change how you think about preparation, competition, and what actually wins. Let's get into it. Hi, Mats. What motivates you these days?
Well, thank you, thank you very much, Cam. It's a great pleasure to be here and see you again. Every time we meet, typically in Montreal, right? We always catch up. We always take time to talk, and we have become really, really good friends. So I'm really happy to be here and talk about one of our favorite topics, namely case competition and case learning.
Yeah. So let's start like talking about a little bit about your coaching philosophy. I think we're similar on that, but there are some differences. So just talk a little bit about sort of as a coach, what are you trying to provide? What's the philosophy behind the coaching when you take those students from London to Montreal every year?
Well, I think coaching, I think you draw probably most coaches, most of us draw from our experience. And I mean, you, Cam, you have been a lot into sports, right? And I think we can learn from other experiences. And I do believe that coaching is, it's about leadership in the end. And I think coaching principles, well, I think one thing we learn when we come to Montreal, I speak a lot about Montreal. I speak a lot about John Molson case competition because this is where I learned the most, right? So I'm sorry about that. But I think there are different principles. And I'm a lot into sailing. Yeah. You know that. We always speak about sailing. I love the horses, Icelandic horses. So I have an Icelandic horse and my wife, she has several, and that's great. I like the sea kayak. Now, I think, why do I mention that? Well, I think there are so many similarities between being a skipper on a sailing yacht with a crew, and then you go out to sail, right? Now, the thing is that when you take out people the first time going out sailing, some of them might never been on a boat before. Others are very, very skilled. Some learn fast. Others, maybe even get seasick, believe it or not. And that's terrible. That's awful. But I think I think fair wind sailing, a nice summer day. We don't have that many here in Sweden, but once they come along, fair wind sailing is nice. There is time to talk. We can discuss. There might be a small mistake, but we fix it. There's no pressure. It's actually very enjoyable. It's nice. But then, Cam, we can have dark skies coming, heavy wind, rough seas. Now, suddenly the situation changes. It gets cold. People get tired. And there's no time for debate. Decisions must be reached for better or for worse. There's a time here. We have to get to harbor, or in the case competition, we have to present for better or for worse. Now, I think that is a nice analogy of what we actually do. What do you think about that? Is that similar to the way you think?
I really like that. It really talks me in terms of this type of stuff I do. I always fly fish a lot. And I think one of the things I like about fly fishing is it's generally a nice relaxing time. There are weather issues and those types of things similar to sailing. But
Yeah.
what it gets me to do is it sort of gets me to think like fish. Where are the fish? What are they
Ah,
doing? Those types of things. And I think it's still that same sort of metaphor in terms of, I think this is something I'm trying to do with my students too, in terms of you're presenting to a panel of judges. Sometimes it's a company, sometimes
yeah.
it's academic judges, sometimes it's just industry that may not be familiar with it. And I think one of the things is just trying to figure out what are they doing? What are they thinking? So you can
Yeah.
start to think about that in terms of how you're going to present that strategy piece. And then I think also in terms of a lot of the sports I did as a kid, really, again, as you come to different races, I was a track and field athlete, a 400-meter runner, and I had my thing that I did. I was very consistent in my 100-meter splits along it.
Yeah.
Others ran in a different style. And it was really
Yeah.
just sort of, as you lined up, you recognize too, the people were there. How am I going to use my strength to hopefully defeat their strengths, knowing hopefully what my weaknesses are? So I think there was a lot of pieces.
Yeah. No, I think, but I think coming back, if I may, to my thinking about the bringing on people in the crew, I think, I mean, when you're out sailing, I think it is, I think of myself, well, I guess as the captain, there will be a skipper in the team, and skipper is, and captain is not necessarily the same thing, but so there will be a skipper and there will be people fulfilling different functions, right? And they're all equally important. And the thing is that we can't make it to harbor without having a crew working together. It's absolutely impossible. You can't do it. So we have to rely upon each other. So I think my view, my role is to build that team and get people safely to harbor. Okay, that is really my job. Okay. So we go off to Sweden, we go to Montreal. I would like to bring them back safely, and also bring them back as a happy team. I'm not talking about if we won or if we lost. Okay, I'm talking about bring them as friends, make them work together, and bring them back as even better friends. And I'm actually very proud to say that I have managed to do that.
I think
And
we're
that's actually
very
30
similar
years,
there.
30 years in a row. And that, I think that's probably one of the achievements. Okay, so we actually, we actually brought home this one, and that was quite an achievement. And of course, again, it's a bit like you're out sailing, and of course you can be in a competition and you're going, wow, we got over and we won, hurrah, hurrah. And that's fantastic. Yeah. But that is only part of it. It's an important part of it, but not the part of it, really. So bringing them back happy. And I think we are in this together. And that is a very important coaching principle of mine. And I think, of course, I come as a representative for Lund University and also for Sweden. Like any sports team, we have to show a good side of our country. I think that's important. It might sound a bit old-fashioned, but then again, I am old-fashioned, so I don't mind. I still think that is important. You Canadians are very proud too, so hey, go for it. So, and then I have maybe a bit of funny one, and that is from trust the force, the Yoda saying, trust the force. And I think that is very important. And it's not obvious. It's important. For you as a coach, you have to look at your team. You've been working with them. They've done everything they can. And now it's their turn to perform. And you have to trust them. And I think that is a beautiful thing.
I love that piece. I don't know if I've told you this story, but the very first year I went to John Molson's, we had a team that really didn't trust the force, didn't trust the process. And so they did their first case at John Molson's. This was like their 33rd case of the year or something like that. And they came out absolutely convinced they had won. I believe we had 3 coaches with us that year, and none of the coaches believed they had won. And we actually lost 6-5. And this new team came out the next day that started to trust the process and really sort of connect. And it went on to win the silver medal eventually. But the other piece of the story was it was also I think the World Junior Hockey Championships that year. And I think we had gone and watched the game against Germany and Canada. And then one of the days, I think was our last case, we were up against Sweden, Lund.
There you go.
Previous night, Sweden had played Canada at the hockey tournament. And one of the guys came into the room with the English newspaper in Montreal, Canada defeats Sweden, and said, here, it's telling the future.
Well, okay. Hockey. I mean, Sweden won 2026. Sweden won the Junior Hockey League. Yeah. And then Sweden won the John Molson case competition. It was a good year. So, but coming back to the coaching principles, so trust the force, that is important. And I think, again, I say it's not obvious. It is something that sometimes we all have different personalities, but sometimes we need like to control things. We would like to have everything planned. We have to do this and this and that. But actually, you are not solving the case, right? As a coach, you are not solving the case. You are not there in the room. So you have to trust them. And if I might add a story, when we were sitting in the big ballroom in the looking at the finalists, and then one of the teammates, when I was looking at Asper's presentation, I said, "Oh my God, this is so good! This is so good." I mean, we might, if we're lucky, we might have a silver, maybe, but they have the gold. And I was just shaking my head. Okay, guys. And then one of the teammates, James, he said, "Coach, relax. We got this." And that was such a good feeling because, of course, he was actually right. But that was it was actually he coaching me, you know? And I think when you arrive to that point, when the team is actually come to that point where they are actually, we are on the same level, so to speak. I think that is a wonderful thing. And when they surpass you, the students, which quite a few do, to be honest, hey, that is a beautiful thing. Let's take that in and say, hey, I'm a lucky guy. I'm a lucky guy to have the opportunity to work with such smart, brilliant, nice, friendly, open people. It's
I
great.
love that. I think that's a huge piece of it because, as I say, I think you're right. Most of the students that have probably been on my teams have surpassed me because they get this. They've got it figured out. And I love the idea of the trust piece of it. And one of the things I think I did later in my coaching career, especially with case competitions where we had a long time to do a case, was I would send them away to read the case, talk about the case, and then come back to me about this is what we're doing. And my philosophy was I'm not going to change what they're doing because I trust what they're doing. And even one team that decided, yeah, we're going to go way outside the box on this because this is what we want to do. And they explained why they want to do it. Let's go for that. And I'm here to help support you to get to the end of that journey, whatever that journey winds up being. I actually just recently did a LinkedIn post or something. I can't remember what it was, but I was talking. I used to meet with my dean one-on-one every once in a while. And we used to always talk about this fact that where we had preliminary and final rounds, it was really nice to bring home hard. And we did that a lot. But at the same time, it was really disappointing in the fact that these teams, and my teams had the knack of pulling out the last number in the hat all the time. So they wound up presenting last quite often. They missed a huge opportunity to learn from what was happening with all the other teams in the room that were presenting in the final. And I was sort of like, yeah, we missed out on this learning opportunity. So how do we start to provide that piece back to them a little bit? And it was really good when competitions started filming finals and that type of stuff, so we could go back and do some stuff afterwards. But at the same time, I think you're really right about this idea of building that level of trust between the team members, between the team and the coach. To always go back to Budapest in 2019, I had a team that they were probably the most talented team I ever had. They were absolutely incredible. And we all knew walking out of the first case that we did that we were dead last in the pool. Something had gone wrong in the process. And we had a cultural day. We had a dinner that evening, a cultural day the next day. And it was just this tremendously rich conversation, trusting conversation between the team members, myself, just figuring out what went wrong. Why did it go wrong? How can we correct that going into the next thing? And I think what I saw was 4 team members become lifelong friends over those, probably 36 hours in between the one case and the next case. And they did a absolutely smashing job on the next case. And I think that was, in my mind, that was the most rewarding piece of my coaching career, just seeing what happened there. And then I just think back and, you know what, I've seen that happen a lot, not as sort of that bright light type of way of seeing it, but it was just absolutely incredible experience that happened, both for me and the team members. And we're still relatively close today. We talk. One of them taught a course with me this past August, and we had a wonderful time.
But Cam, you know where you find the Swedish team after each presentation, right?
Yeah.
You find it us in the bar, and we take a table and we sit down. I typically have a Molson export beer. I mean, I say sponsor the sponsor, right? So I enjoy the Molson beer, and the other guys they drink whatever they like. But what would we do after each case solved? We sit down, and then we have this routine that I learned in the Navy. I mean, I was in the Navy for 2 years, a long, long time ago, as an conscripted officer. But what I learned from the Navy was after each exercise, we started out sitting down, and the first question was to the first person, okay, so tell us about your performance today and how you feel about your performance today. And then that person is allowed to speak at any length, and then until they're happy, and then they have to shut up. And then the next person in team comments upon that performance. And then the next person comments, and the next person comments. And then finally, as a coach, I kind of conclude what I think. And then after that, we have a free discussion. Now, I can tell you, this is a routine, and it needs to be a routine. It needs to be done when you have fair winds and when you have rough weather. Doesn't matter. It's a routine. And the thing is, if there is a thaw, you pull it and you prepare yourself for the next case. Sometimes people would say, I failed, or I missed that, I couldn't find the word, or I suggested this idea and it turned out not to be the best. And then what actually typically happens, people will say, well, we didn't even notice, or no, we took that decision together. Don't blame yourself. Or if there is an actual problem, we solve it. And I think it takes time, but I would say that even though we have things going on, there might be, some fun things going on and so on. My teams typically say, no, we do not want to rush this, because here we can give very direct feedback. And again, coming back to the thing, when I'm not the only coach anymore, it's actually the team coaching themselves. That is beautiful and very, very important.
Yeah, I think that's a huge important piece. It's something I do with my teams. We go to the bar, we go to dinner, whatever.
Yeah.
And it is having that discussion in terms of what happened. We do it in a slightly different pattern, but it's the same thing. It's getting people to talk about what happened. Yeah. And if there are things that we need to pull, we'll pull those at those times. I know the last case I was at, competition was again in Budapest in 2024 in April, and the team had struggled, and we had a whole bunch of issues putting the team together, and they didn't get the preparation that they needed. But as they went from case to case, there were huge improvements. And before the last case, we got together for dinner at the Buda Castle. And it was, again, a fantastic conversation around what can we do tomorrow in order to improve on what we've seen, the jumps, the leaps and the jumps that I'd seen with the team. And I think these are the big things. And the amazing piece is it's not me talking most of the time. It's them. It's a discussion that they're having. They're coaching themselves. And every once in a while, I may intervene to ask a question or give them a little bit different point of view. But it's these incredibly rich conversations about how do we help each other get better.
Yeah.
And
but
I sit down and that's and that's it.
But it's also
the reward.
I think every participant coming to case competition, they are on a journey, right? I mean, the team is on a journey. We are building the team. We speak about the team, but actually, if you go down to the individuals, each individual has his or her own journey, and of course, the weaknesses. And I think when you meet the team, get to know the team, you will see that there are things that can be worked upon, so to speak. And this is where you get advice, you give feedback, you give suggestions, you give a second try, etc., etc. But I think, for instance, there can be a person that is a bit shy. There can be a person that doesn't really, own the stage and cannot really, work with hands and voice and do all the things that are necessary to do the rhetorics. That's one thing. There could be people that are super smart, but they cannot explain what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that is that is a pretty tough situation. You have the whole solution in your mind, but you can't explain it. Now, I think all these things, with time, you will need to understand that. I mean, that some people, when they're with person from the marketing background, they say, well, uh, how do I fit into this case? Well, and or the financial person, there is no numbers. What am I supposed to do here in this particular case? Or they can be the people person, say this has nothing to do with people, etc., etc., and they're struggling to find their professional role in different cases. But to be honest, if you start to think about the team as an executive team, you will soon understand that there will always be people question. And you will understand, even though there are no numbers in the case, there are still financial aspects to consider. And the marketing person, they can say, whatever the case is, reputation matters, etc. So there are journeys that will help people to understand that, okay, so maybe I am in finance, but actually, if I don't understand business more broadly, I will stay in finance. That's it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a huge piece of it. And I think one of the things I often do is when we first start, it's not right away. I let the team kind of bond a little bit, but once we first really get more serious in terms of the content and what the case looks like and what they're presenting, I always talk about goals, and we split these goals up into team and individual goals. And so that helps me their journeys. And we revisit that a lot in terms of have those goals changed and those types of things. And I think that's a piece that just sort of really helps me sort of figure out where they want to go. And I think one of the things that I heard from a few of my students in the past that have been on teams is that piece, I think, really helped them kind of make this their journey or more of their journey. Because it's not like when they're in the classroom and doing a case in the classroom or those types of things where it's sort of none of that comes in. It shows that we're paying attention to sort of each other. And I think helps really build that trust level between the coach, the team members.
Right. I think that the point, but to have a common goal, I think what I do, and I guess I'm now revealing a secret, but then again, so once we have selected a team, that takes time. But once the team is selected, I say, well, I invite you to come to my home. And then they say, should we bring our computers? Yeah, of course, there will be a case. And then they entered into my home. And then I say, well, ladies and gentlemen, you can place your computers over there. And then I bring them into the kitchen. And there is a pasta machine, the one you actually do by hand. And there is all the ingredients to do a lasagna. And then I sit on the bar stool and I take a glass of red wine and I said, okay, guys, in 2 hours, I would like one spinaci and one with the meat. Okay, let's get started. And then they have to prepare lasagna. And this is a lot of fun, of course, but it's also about, first bring together the team. And then during dinner, we speak about the goals. And typically I refer to this very famous Mount Everest case. It's a very well-known case from Harvard Business School. And I do recommend it. And the case is really about, and there's a book about it, and it's a true story, how a team of mountaineers is going to climb Mount Everest. And then things happen. It's very unfortunate. People die, etc. But the thing is that what we learned from that case is that information is not shared. They have different goals and it is no real leadership. So when we are sitting there and I ask, okay, so we're going to Montreal, ladies and gentlemen. So what do you hope to get out of this? And then we agree. And I think that is very, very important.
Yeah, I like that. And I do similar things. And one of the things, though, I talk about my teams, and I do this in my classes too. I have a reflective piece that I've done in all my senior classes. And I get people to lay out their goals and then we talk about those goals. And so one of the ones with teams always is winning the competition. And I sort of turn back and say, you know what, that's really not a goal. That's an outcome. If you get all the other things lined up, the outcome is that you win the competition. And I think that just resets a little bit of the mindset of the team. And I do that very early on. And as well, we're still doing the bonding period, because I didn't tell my teams this while I was coaching really actively. But afterwards, the news got out that I didn't really care what the content of the cases were early on. It was a discussion about how are you getting together? How are you bonding? How are you coming together as a team rather than the content? And so that's when we were sort of setting those goals things, and then just sort of letting them know that it just sort of, I think it was a revelation point for all of the teams in a lot of cases that, yeah, if we try to accomplish these things, they'll lead to us doing well at the case competition.
Yeah, but I think I do believe that case-based learning and teaching is wonderful. Case competition adds a dimension. And there is something happens when there is a competition. I know that in the Swedish school system at our universities, I mean, competition is maybe not so well seen. The whole idea of a case competition is frowned upon by some, and it's a bit odd. We don't have the case culture as you do in Canada, for example. So, but nevertheless, based upon my now 30 years of experience, is that something happens. Now, when we talk about, when we spoke after enjoying our lasagna this January, actually we agreed that, okay, let's get to the semis. That's our goal. And then one teammate, it was James, of course, he said, no, we should win the whole thing. But that's James. But the rest of us, we agreed upon, let's get to the semis. And if we get to the semis, we set a new goal. I mean, obviously, right? And I think this is maybe cultural, I don't know. But that's what we did. But I can also see what happens with people in a team when there is actually a competition. And I think a healthy competition, a friendly competition, and when everybody knows that just joining is winning, actually. That's great.
No, I love that idea. And I think that's the big piece. I think that this discussion I had around teams in terms of this idea of outcomes versus winning as a goal, I think that really helps sort of set that in the mindset that, yeah, there's a lot of things here that you're going to take away, and you wind up winning in a lot of different ways just by being there. I think I judged a case at Haskane weekends ago. And one of the things I told the teams was, you know what? They won by just showing up, right? With all of the things they have in their lives.
Yeah.
And sort of putting the team together, spending the 5 days they had on the case together and presenting really good ideas. I think that was a win in itself, right? And so I think if we can get more of that, and how can we infuse a little bit of that? And yeah, there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, right? But when you start to look at it, what are you taking away from this? Where are you winning? And I think that, again, I want to talk about a couple of students I had that were on a number of my teams. They were undergrad students, and they went to their first case competition. It was a leadership development program that I was involved in. It was probably some of the worst case presentation I've ever seen in my life. And they admitted to themselves that it wasn't very good. And we joke about it all the time. But I think we sat down afterwards and just talked about, yeah, that wasn't very good, but what did you take away from that? And I think that discussion really brought them to the forefront in terms of, I want to do this again. I want to try this. These are the wins that I'm taking away from it. One of them was on that Budapest team that was that very talented Budapest team that did a horrible job in the first case. And I think that experience that she had really helped the other 3 team members in that next 36 hours or whatever they had before the next case, really helped them sort of put a really great perspective on, this is what happened. This is how we can get together. And I believe a couple of the team members actually wound up getting married eventually on that team.
Well, there you go. There you go. You keep the family together. That's excellent. I think, sometimes we were talking about what do students, get from being part of a case competition. And I think I use a number of 5 bullet points that that I sorry about that. I use when I speak with students, and I typically say that, all right, so what you can expect. I mean, first I say, first of all, being part of this case competition, you will understand that you are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. And this is a literary quote from Winnie the Pooh. So this is wise words from Winnie the Pooh. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. That is great. Next. Then I say, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. I think that is important because what I want as a coach is a clean and happy ship. People are prepared, work hard, clear roles, trust and respect, common goals. That's what I ask for. So fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Next, third one. You never get a second chance to give a first impression. And this is all about the presentation. It's all about, the impact, owning the scene. And then we have a more like never leave anyone behind, never leave anyone behind. And this is, of course, the whole team spirit idea. You're working together, so never leave anyone behind. And then the final one is, and this is good to remember when things are going south. And I say, it ain't over until the fat lady sings. And that means, grit, fighting spirit, and you just, you just hang in there. It just might work. And when I do these 5 bullet points, people typically smile and we have a good time. But there is actually a lot of depth in these 5 bullet points. And I use them over and over again. And that's part of my recruiting, actually.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a huge piece of it. And I think going back to one of my John Molson's team, it's not over till the fat lady sings. Yeah, we got that in, I think, 2023 or something like that, when we just barely squeaked into the semifinals. I don't think we weren't going in thinking that we were going to be a semifinalist that morning, because we definitely looking from the outside. But you know what? Things happened, and everything fell into place. And there was this announcement that Haskane, it was the 9th qualifier for the final, and it was a big shock.
But that's like one of our great cross-country skiers, Gunde Svan. He used to say that people that train a lot, they typically have more luck. It's a good one.
I think, yeah, I know when we first met, you always pushed me on terms of how many cases did Haskane do. And that's back in the days where
Right.
Larry was my co-coach, and Larry was a believer in, and we would do 40 cases because we would make the finals. The last 7 were at the competition. So we had 33 practices to get in between the naming of the team and the end of the year. As a coach, I cut that back a little bit, but we were still doing a lot of cases, and it was probably in the 30s instead of hitting 40. But I think there's a lot to that in terms of, that practice piece. You learn a lot about yourself, how your team works together. There's some other values to it. You learn a little bit about a number of different industries. You get experience with slightly different cases and those type of things. But I think the big thing is it gives you that opportunity as a team to come more together. And I think those teams, benefit from it, not only in terms of often performance, but also just in terms of the real life skills that they take away from the competition itself. I think it's huge.
Yeah. No, I think we were on a question earlier before we started this podcast. What advice would one give to younger faculty? I think that's good. And again, what advice would you give to existing faculty and coaches, right? Those are 2 good questions. And I have to say, when I look back in my own life, I was, as a researcher, started to work with another researcher, Professor Gracier at Harvard Business School. And during our writing articles and doing our research, he invited me to have sit-ins, listening to what they did and how they talked. Now, I looked at it and I absolutely loved it. And I said, this is so different. It's so rewarding to have people in action mood when the teacher is no longer the teacher, but more like a discussion leader, and people are actually writing cases. Now, when I saw this, I actually decided, and I would actually might sound a bit pompous, but I actually took a strategic decision in my life. And I said, okay, I got this. I see what this is, and I see where the rest of teaching is going. And I said, from now on, I'm all in on case teaching. And I started to write cases together with my colleague. I started to lobbying to have my own case-based course in Lund. That was the first one in Sweden. I started to, sign up for the case competitions, volunteer, and try to, keep my place the best I can. I started really to dig in. I took courses. I read the books. I was really, and of course, coming to John Molson and listening to colleagues, becoming friends like with you and so many other of the 36 coaches that we typically meet, I was like taking in all this information. Now, what I would say to younger faculty is that think about this. Think about what you're going to do with your life as a teacher and a researcher. I would say that it's so much more rewarding to do what we have been talking about today, you and I, Cam. To trust the force, to build a team, to learn together. I mean, to have these discussions, to connect your serial connect brains and make a bigger brain, basically. And it's all about human beings working. And here comes something that actually makes me very happy that I took this strategic decision many, many years ago. Because with AI, teaching is going to change. There are many things we could do at a university and business schools. But one thing that cannot be replicated is actually the case discussion live. That cannot be replicated. And in my classes, AI is not invited during these sessions. I'm not saying, hey, AI is part of our lives already. It's going to continue to be so. It's going to be more so. Yes, true. But nevertheless, I think the whole idea of actually being able to solve and discuss a problem, analyze a problem, come up with a recommendation together with other fellow human beings is going to remain a great competitive advantage and very important. And I think this is an advice I would give to younger faculty. And the funny thing is exactly the same advice I would give to actually existing coaches, actually.
I love that. I think I've been doing a lot of thinking around that, doing a little bit of writing around that whole idea. And it's amazing. We have very similar stories. Mine was
Yes.
a university prof that I was doing research with, and she was involved with case competitions with students, et cetera. And I think really introduced me to it and introduced me to this whole idea. And I like you, made that strategic decision that this was where I wanted to spend my time. And I had the luxury of a dean that was very supportive of that, sort of like the way that I coached and sort of treated my teams versus some of the other things that were happening in the school. So just sort of gave me free reign to do that. I think one of the problems we're running into, and I don't know if this is true in Europe as much, but in North America, there's so much pressure on young people, even teaching faculty, to produce some sort of research. And we need to take that away. I think we need to measure, particularly teaching faculty, in terms of they're there to teach. And how do we measure them in terms of actually delivering that teaching? And again, I think a lot of that should be around that discussion, around the building of skill sets and not as much in terms of the delivery of information. I think that's where education becomes valuable in terms of teaching the skills, getting people to learn those skills, allowing them to get together, have discussions, make decisions, learn how to make decisions, those pieces, all of those aspects that we see with case teams all of the time. And so I think part of it is the system is broken to some extent. And I think hopefully AI sort of gets them to realize that, because if they don't change the system, what value are a lot of them delivering to students that AI can't? Right? We need to figure out that value is in the skills side of it, the types of things that we do with case teams, delivery information, because AI is very, very good at that. AI is very much better than most people at that, right? It's the human aspects that we need to bring into education a lot more and make those pieces work for it. So I think we're thinking a lot similar.
Yeah, I think it's when I say I don't bring AI into class. I'm not saying either or. Let's not get stuck in the tyranny of either
Yeah.
or. I say in my classes, there is no AI. In other classes, there is a lot of AI. I think you need to be able to handle all the potential of the generative AI, of course. But if we forget the human side, working with people, I mean, live people in
Yeah.
a team, coming together, solving difficult things, fair wind sailing and hard wind, rough wind sailing, all the things we've been talking about, I think we lose something very important. And I would say also as a teacher and a professor, we are losing something very important. I mean, that is what
Yeah.
actually inspires me. That's what inspires me. And what I did, actually, I took one of the cases when our team was doing a training case. I took the case, I scanned it, and I asked OpenAI, solve this case, and I gave the criteria we have in Molson, and I say, by the way, create also a good PowerPoint structure. And of course, we got one. And then I compared to what the team did. And to be honest, if we would use AI, I think we can just quit doing what we're doing. It would kill it completely. Might still think that this is one of the last outposts for creative human work.
Yeah. No, I love that idea. And I think that whole idea around human creative work and bringing that in is hugely important. And that's, again, I think when I think back about it, what were the rewarding experiences I had? And it was about all of those discussions, all of sort of seeing the growth that the team had in terms of being able to talk together and come together in terms of here's what we think is best. And this is how we got there.
Yeah.
Rather than just sort of throwing this in. And as I say, I think one of the things, and I've talked about this with a number of people, and I've done a little bit of writing on this also in terms of AI, is there's places where, yes, I allowed AI into the classroom, and there are a lot of places I didn't. And a lot of that was sitting down and sort of, what is my goal here? Do I want to have happen? And can AI add to that? Does AI take away from that? Right. And sort of really sort of setting those pieces. And I really appreciated the discussion we had with the Coaches Council for John Molson's early on about AI, that those pieces came through. The idea that what are the goals? What's John Molson's international case competition about? What are we trying to deliver? How do we get that? How do we make that delivery happen in terms of what are we trying to deliver to the participants of the competition?
To bring the discussion back to my kitchen, imagine if I invited my students and I said, okay, here's a frozen lasagna. Here's a frozen lasagna. I put it in the stove and let's enjoy it. Would that be the same thing?
No.
I think that is actually a good comparison. I mean, the frozen lasagna can be really, really good. And who knows, might even taste better. I don't know. Probably not. But the point is that they made it. And they struggled to make it. And now they know how to make it. And of course, maybe next time, later in the week, they will buy a frozen lasagna because it's more convenient. And they don't have to, get messy. It takes time and all that. It's more practical and faster and cheaper, right? So I think we have the point. I will actually remind myself of this case of the frozen lasagna and the homemade one, because I think it's to the point.
Yeah, I think that works really well. And I love that idea because, again, one of the things I think both of us realize is that importance of bonding early on and sort of figuring out how you're going to work together and figuring out who each other is, I think is so important. And as I say, I think, and as I've talked to my teams a lot about this in terms of, or after my retirement and sort of my active coaching piece is, I didn't really care that much about the content early on. And it was all about trying to get those sessions that we had after the case, getting them to talk about how they work together and how they can work better together. And why, when they were writing down stuff, why did that get left on the board and didn't get into the case? And sort of those types of things. And how were they making decisions through generally 3 or 4 cases, and just sort of coming to consensus in terms of, this is the process, but each team is individual and the process changes a little bit for each of those teams. So what does your process actually look like? And going back to Budapest, what I discovered was they had this great process in terms of they'd read the case. They could then go off and do some research. They do some research individually and then come back and then actually finally make a sort of final decision where they get it. And what happened in that first case is they made that decision before going off and doing that research. And doing that research would have actually informed them that the company had tried what they're doing. But it wasn't the wrong answer. It was that they didn't talk about why the company failed the first time they did it. How could they have changed it to make it work a second time? And I think they started to realize that was the first question judges asked in the Q&A. That's where they had done this. And then that discussion that we had, dinner was about 15-minute walk. It took us about 45 minutes to get to dinner on our walk because the discussion was so rich. Everybody was wondering where the heck Calgary was so they could start dinner. Although we did get lost a little bit too. But that's beside the point.
But I think that when I compare, since I work also as a strategy consultant in working with branding and companies, presenting to executive teams, boards, and other teams. I mean, I have to say that what is done in the consulting business is so very similar to what we do and what we train in case competition. And there are so many similarities. So we are actually preparing the participants to become business professionals. It's no longer just silos. You're not just doing corporate finance or marketing or organization or people or whatever. You have to be able to put everything into a context, and you have to analyze, you have to describe the current situation, you have to choose your alternatives, you have to argue, you have to key indicators, how to choose, you have to implement, risks, mitigation, finance, and everything, and recommendation. And then you have to present this, and you have to be able to look at and understand the people you're speaking with. You have to look at the management. You have to connect with them, and you have to say, well, what are the questions that keeps them up at night? What is really what worries them? And here is our recommendation. And then everything you do from minute 1 until minute last, you are actually hammering in an idea. This is our recommendation. And first you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And that is good advice from Eisenhower. And that is the power of professional presentation. And this is actually what you and I and all our fellow coaches are trying to achieve. And we see fantastic examples from all over the world in the John Molson case competition. Now, of course, your experience is so much wider than mine, and you see it all over the world. And at times, I wonder, looking at all my fellow coaches, I think it's almost like a brother and sisterhood. And that is actually one thing that motivates me to come back and do it again. And I enjoy it, and I'm just happy to be part of it.
Yeah, no, and that's the part I miss in the retirement and why I've been involved in advisory committees and a bunch of other stuff and doing some other pieces, because I think that's the piece. That was the fun part. And I knew going in retirement was the piece I was going to miss. And one of the reasons I've started this up and hopefully get some connection and draw and stuff like that. So, but even if it doesn't, I think this is the fun part still. It's a fun part of retirement. It's a piece that keeps the mind active. And I think, even if with just a few followers, I think it's something I'm going to continue to do. I think we've covered a lot of the questions that I had in terms of our discussion. So I just want to wrap up with one question, and it's going to be a little bit different than sort of typically, but you've been really close at John Molson's a number of times. What made the difference this year? What put you over the lip to that top of the podium?
Oh, wow. Well, to be honest, sometimes all the stars needs to be aligned. And I think there is I mean, the teams are also very strong teams. And when I say stars align, I mean a great team, a lot of training, everybody's happy. Sometimes you need just a little bit of luck,
Yeah.
That might be the topic of the cases. It might be that we have a person that knows something about something. So I think that is one part. When it comes to what I've done this year more than I have done before is actually when we solve cases and I say, well, this was pretty good. I actually ask the team to say, can you please send me a reviewed version of your solution and your templates to me? Once we now have discussed the case. And sometimes I even ask them to present the very same case twice. And I think that was a good learning circle and good feedback. The other thing that I've done a bit more this and actually last year, because it was 2025 training, right, was to have actually sit in the room and just listen and observe how they worked. And at times I said, okay, time out. Let's talk about this. Stop the clock. And then I asked them to consider maybe a framework, maybe a different approach, maybe a different way to discuss the case. So I think those two parts in the training actually turned out to be very helpful. But other than that, I can just say that a bit like Gunde Svan, the more you train, the luckier you become.
We had a few tech issues at the end of today's episode. I'd like to thank Max. If this convo with Mats just flipped how you see leadership, trust, and team bonding in case comps, that's exactly why we're here. Real talk, no fluff. Trust the force. Build unbreakable crews. And remember, human creativity still beats AI when the storms hit. If this sparks something, smash the subscribe for more Unbarred Convos that will sharpen your communication, creativity, and critical thinking. Drop one takeaway below. What's your trust the force moment going to be? Let's keep leveling up those mad skills. See you next time.